The sound of the knife against the cutting board was rhythmic, almost comforting, a small reminder of normalcy in a life built around routine. I diced the carrots into perfect cubes, humming softly as the stew simmered on the stove. The kitchen smelled like rosemary and garlic, and the golden evening light poured through the curtains, washing everything in a soft glow. It was an ordinary evening, or so I thought. Then Richard cleared his throat. It wasn't just any sound. After 25 years of marriage, I'd learned the language of his silences, his pauses, the subtle shift in his tone before something serious. My hand froze midair. I looked up to see him sitting at the table, his coffee cup untouched, his gaze fixed on the wooden grain beneath his fingers. His jaw was tight, his shoulders stiff, a man rehearsing a sentence he wished he didn't have to say. "Laura," he began, his voice uneven, "we've been together for a long time." I felt the first twinge of unease in my stomach. The words were too formal, too careful. I set the knife down, wiped my hands on a towel, and waited. He didn't look up. And I think I need something different. Something new. Someone, he hesitated, and I already knew how the sentence would end. Someone younger. For a moment, the air went still. The ticking clock on the wall sounded suddenly deafening. My heart didn't break in that dramatic, movie scene way, no gasps, no tears. It was quieter, deeper. Like a slow, steady tear through the fabric of everything I'd believed was safe. Someone younger, I repeated softly, almost to myself. The words tasted foreign, bitter. Richard looked up finally, his eyes full of something that wasn't guilt but rather discomfort, the look of a man who'd already justified his actions to himself long before saying them out loud. "It's not that you've done anything wrong," he rushed to explain. "You've been incredible, Laura. But people change. I've changed. I just feel like I need more excitement in my life." Excitement. That word landed like a knife between us. 25 years. That's how long I'd stood beside him, through hospital nights, career setbacks, raising children, paying bills, building a home brick by brick. I'd given him my youth, my energy, my loyalty. And now, after all that, he wanted excitement. A younger woman to make him feel alive again, while I stood here surrounded by the echoes of everything we'd built. I didn't cry. Instead, a strange clarity washed over me. "I see," I said simply. My voice was calm, too calm. I picked up the knife and continued chopping, though my hands trembled slightly. The room filled again with the sound of the blade hitting the board. Chop, chop, chop. Each strike steadied me. Each slice felt like reclaiming control. He shifted uncomfortably, perhaps expecting a scene, tears, anger, accusations. But there was none. Only silence. The kind of silence that makes people fidget. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he murmured, his tone soft, rehearsed. "I just don't want to live a lie anymore." A lie. I almost laughed. Was it a lie when we promised, for better or worse? Was it a lie when I held his hand through the death of his father, when we scraped money together to keep his business afloat, when I stayed up every night nursing him after surgery? But instead of saying any of that, I just nodded slowly. "I understand," I said, and this time, I meant it in a way he couldn't possibly grasp. He blinked, confused by my composure. "You're taking this, well," he said awkwardly. I gave a faint smile. "Don't mistake calm for acceptance, Richard." He opened his mouth, but I was already walking out of the kitchen. My legs felt strangely light, as if they weren't mine. I went to our bedroom, our shared space filled with memories, the framed photos from our vacations, the worn-out comforter we'd argued about replacing, the faint scent of his cologne still hanging in the air. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the reflection of myself in the mirror. My face looked tired, older perhaps, but not weak. There was a flicker in my eyes, something I hadn't seen in years. Resolve. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling while he slept soundly beside me, unaware that the foundation of our marriage had already crumbled. My mind replayed his words on a loop, someone younger. It wasn't just about age. It was about value. He no longer saw mine. I thought of the girl I used to be, full of dreams, laughter, and energy. Somewhere along the way, I'd buried her under layers of compromise, responsibility, and quiet love. I had become the caretaker, the supporter, the one who kept everything together while he went chasing ambitions. And now that the weight of those years showed on my face, he wanted to trade me for a blank slate. But that night, something changed inside me. The tears that didn't fall turned into something sharper, a quiet determination. I realized that if he wanted someone younger, he was about to learn that youth wasn't measured in years. It was measured in spirit, and mine wasn't gone. I turned to look at him one last time, his face softened by the moonlight, peaceful in his selfishness. And I whispered to the darkness, "You wanted someone younger, Richard. You'll get your wish, but not the way you think." Then I closed my eyes and let the silence swallow me whole, already planning the woman I would become, not for him, but for me. 3 weeks passed since that night in the kitchen, but Richard never mentioned the conversation again. It was as if he believed his declaration, that cruel, calm announcement that he needed someone younger, had simply floated away with the steam from his coffee cup. He came home at the usual times, made polite conversation about bills and errands, and pretended nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The silence between us was no longer comfortable. It was sharp, deliberate, heavy. Yet I didn't fill it. I let it sit there, breathing between us like an uninvited guest. Instead, I started with something small. The next morning, I woke up early and went for a walk, no makeup, no purpose beyond moving, breathing, reclaiming space for myself. The air was crisp, the sun barely peeking over the rooftops, and for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. That day, I signed up for a gym membership. The girl behind the counter smiled when I hesitated at the age box on the form. "You're never too old to start," she said brightly. I smiled back. "No," I replied. "You're not." The first week was brutal. My muscles ached, my lungs burned, and I wanted to quit every other day. But I kept going, not for him, not to prove a point, but because each drop of sweat washed away a layer of resentment. With every run, every stretch, every small victory, I felt myself returning. At home, I changed too. I cut my hair, short, sharp, freeing. The first time I saw my reflection afterward, I barely recognized the woman in the mirror. She looked bold, untamed, younger, not in years, but in energy. I cleared out my wardrobe, filling boxes with clothes I'd once worn to please him, the muted tones he liked, the respectable skirts and blouses. I replaced them with what I wanted, jeans that hugged my figure, bright scarves, soft dresses that made me feel alive. And then there was the art class. I'd always wanted to paint, but life, marriage, motherhood, bills, had always come first. When I saw the flyer for a local art studio offering evening classes, I signed up without hesitation. The first night, I walked into the room full of strangers, brushes, and the scent of acrylic paint, and I felt a thrill I hadn't felt in decades. We painted still lifes and landscapes, but soon, I began to paint faces, women's faces. Faces that looked a little like mine, strong, sad, hopeful, evolving. Richard noticed the changes, of course. He wasn't blind. He'd come home to find music playing, not the quiet background tunes he preferred, but old rock songs that made me want to dance barefoot in the kitchen. He'd ask, "Going somewhere?" When I'd get ready for my evening classes, his eyes narrowing slightly at my makeup, my earrings, the spark in my step. One evening, he came home earlier than usual. I was in front of the mirror, adjusting my necklace before heading out. I saw his reflection behind me, his brow furrowed, his lips pressed together. "You look different," he said after a long pause. I smiled faintly. "Different how?" He hesitated. "Younger," he admitted, the word catching in his throat. I turned to face him, my expression unreadable. "Isn't that what you wanted?" He blinked, thrown off by my tone. "That's not what I meant." But I was already picking up my purse. "Don't wait up," I said softly, echoing the calm he once used when delivering my heartbreak. Then I walked out. At the art studio that night, I couldn't stop smiling. My classmates, a mix of retirees, students, and dreamers, laughed with me, shared their stories, their little pieces of life. I realized how much I'd missed simply being seen, not as someone's wife, not as the caretaker of a household, but as me. During the break, a man named Ethan, tall, kind eyes, a widower in his 50s, complimented my painting. "You've got something special," he said, studying the canvas. I laughed lightly. "Maybe it's just rust," I replied. He shook his head. "No, it's emotion. That's rarer." His words stayed with me. Not because I was seeking attention, but because they reminded me of something vital. I was still capable of inspiring admiration, conversation, life. When I returned home later that night, Richard was sitting in the living room, pretending to read. His eyes followed me as I walked past him. I felt his gaze linger, confused, curious, maybe even jealous. But I didn't stop to acknowledge it. In the days that followed, I caught him watching me more often. He'd ask harmless questions. "Where are you going? Who are you meeting? What's that smile for?" For the first time in years, he was the one unsure, the one left waiting for answers. And the irony didn't escape me. Because once, I had spent years trying to be enough for him. Now, I didn't need to try. My worth didn't come from his attention, it came from the woman I'd finally let myself become. One morning, as I packed my bag for another class, he asked quietly, "Laura, are we okay?" I paused, met his eyes, and smiled gently. "We're evolving." And as I walked out the door, leaving him there with his uncertainty and his half-empty coffee cup, I realized something beautiful. I no longer needed him to see my value. I already did. It was late afternoon when Richard finally asked me to sit down and talk. The sun was beginning to set, painting the kitchen walls in soft orange hues, the same kitchen where, weeks ago, he'd told me he wanted someone younger. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had set the table, made coffee, even placed a small vase of flowers in the center, as if rehearsing some quiet apology. I walked in slowly, not nervous, not angry, just curious. Curious about what he thought he could say now that I had already let him go in my heart. "Laura," he began, his voice hesitant, "I think we need to talk." I took a seat across from him, folding my hands calmly. "Go ahead." He looked older that evening, not because of his age, but because of the guilt that had finally caught up with him. His shoulders slumped, his hair slightly grayer, his eyes avoiding mine. For once, the confidence, the control, the calm authority he'd always carried, it was gone. "I've been thinking," he continued, his voice faltering. "About us. About what I said." He exhaled, staring at his hands. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was fear of getting older, maybe I thought chasing youth would make me feel alive again. But seeing you these past few weeks. He finally looked up, and there it was, that flash of realization, that stunned awareness of what he had thrown away. "You look incredible, Laura. You seem so happy, so full of life." And I realized something. He paused, struggling to find words. "It wasn't youth I wanted. It was the version of me that I lost. But you found yourself again. And I lost you in the process." His confession should have moved me. Maybe a few months ago, it would have. But now, it only made me feel an almost tender pity. "Richard," I said softly, "you didn't lose me in the last few weeks. You lost me years ago, every time you made me feel invisible, every time you looked through me instead of at me." He winced, his hand tightening around his mug. "I was stupid. I took you for granted. I thought you'd always be there." I said quietly. Until I wasn't. The silence that followed was thick, not angry, not bitter, just final. He reached across the table, as if trying to bridge the distance between us. "We can fix this, Laura. I'll do better. I'll make it right." For a moment, I looked at his hand, the same hand that had once held mine through every major milestone of our lives, the births, the funerals, the triumphs, the heartbreaks. It was familiar, almost comforting, but it no longer felt like home. "Richard," I began gently, "you wanted someone younger. And I suppose, in a way, I became her. But not for you." His eyes widened slightly. "What do you mean?" I smiled, not cruelly, but truthfully. "You see, for years, I lived through you. I was your support, your shadow, your safety net. But when you said you wanted something different, you set me free. You made me remember that I am not just someone's wife, I am a whole person." He swallowed hard, looking genuinely lost. "Is there someone else?" The question hung in the air. I let out a quiet laugh. "There doesn't have to be. Isn't it strange how men always assume a woman's happiness must be tied to someone else?" He looked down, ashamed. I continued, my voice steady but not harsh. "No, Richard, there's no one else. There's just me. And for the first time in a long, long time, that's enough." He opened his mouth as if to argue, but nothing came out. He knew there was no argument left to make. He'd wanted youth, excitement, life, and in the process, he had inspired all of that within me, just not in the way he'd imagined. I stood up slowly, taking my purse from the chair beside me. "I'm not angry with you," I said softly. "In a strange way, I should thank you. Because you forced me to rediscover myself." He looked at me, eyes glossy, his lips trembling as if words could somehow undo everything. "Laura, please," he whispered. "Don't go." I paused at the doorway and turned to face him one last time. "You had 25 years to make me stay," I said quietly. "And I gave you every chance. But now, I have to choose myself, something I should have done long ago." For a moment, neither of us moved. The room was still, the fading sunlight glinting off the rim of his untouched coffee cup. Then I smiled faintly, not out of triumph, but closure. "You once said you wanted to feel alive again," I added. So did I. The difference is, I actually did something about it. He didn't reply. He couldn't. His silence was the sound of realization, the sound of a man who had just understood that the woman he had dismissed as too old was the one thing he could never replace. As I stepped outside, the evening air met me like a soft embrace. The sky was streaked with pink and gold, and I felt weightless, as though every burden, every compromise, every forgotten dream had finally lifted. I walked to my car, started the engine, and glanced at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the same one who'd once begged for love in silence. She was radiant, confident, alive. And as I drove away, leaving behind the house that had held both my happiest and hardest years, I whispered to myself, "You did it, Laura. You chose you." For the first time in 25 years, that was enough.